I don't know if I need to go into detail about that. On the next page, when asked what effect he thinks the offence would have on his victim, he cried, saying, "She's going to hurt a lot, she will go through a lot, she might have problems trusting people again." He said, yeah, so all that he can relate to is his own experience. His grandmother also reported that he's extremely remorseful, and he also feels extreme regret and remorse towards his grandmother. Point 8, treatment. Cognitive behavioral therapy has now been generally accepted as the most effective approach to treating sexual offenders. And most importantly, that this therapy targets the dynamic risk factors, which I will summarize just now again, and focus on educating the client about risky situations and potential precursors for sexual offences against children, such as association with antisocial peers or drug abuse. The greatest factor in rehabilitation is, of course, the willingness of the accused to accept full responsibility for the crime and willingness to undergo treatment. Although there's no guarantee that treatment will be successful, the accused in this matter have accepted full responsibility for the crime and said he is willing to undergo treatment. And then, my Lord, in summary, as stated above, Mr. Ninow's early parenting, so there I refer to those factors earlier, such as his parents' young age, the fact that they were drug addicts, the fact that his mother also has a psychiatric illness, witnessing the abuse of his mother. So those factors, plus his own abuse history, including alleged sexual abuse, and being intoxicated with alcohol and drugs at the time of committing the offence, cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors for his offence, but it could potentially have played a role in his behaviour when committing the crime. Based on the above risk assessment, the following static risk factors have been identified. That is his own child abuse, mental illness, and physical coercion. Mental illness can be a static and a dynamic risk factor because it was there before the crime, but it's still there and will still be there and will still be needed to manage after the crime. In terms of dynamic risk factors, the risk factors that I've identified is problems with substance use, problems with treatment adherence, mental illness, and that includes suicidal ideation, and then self-management, or rather problems with stress and coping. As I said, he uses drugs to cope or to escape his reality. And then there's partly problems with planning, there's more problems with impulsivity. And then there's also problems with non-intimate relationships as well as unstable employment. Multiple research of decades of sex offender recidivism research have shown two major risk factors related to sexual offences, which are, the first is deviant sexual interest, and the second one is antisocial personality disorder. These risk factors are psychologically meaningful because deviant sexual interest, and so there we talk about, for instance, a sexual interest in an inappropriate object or person, such as a child. Because deviant sexual interest can be viewed as the motivations for committing the sexual offence, whereas having an antisocial personality disorder represents factors that facilitate on acting on those motivations. And as discussed earlier, antisocial personality disorder involves not having a conscience, not being able to empathize or put yourself in somebody else's shoes, repeated interaction or conflict with the law, etc. Mr. Ninow's drug addiction is probably the risk factor that is most concerning It's imperative that he adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, and that he adheres to psychological and psychiatric treatment in order to better regulate his emotions. Based on the report writer's interactions with Mr. Ninow and clinical observations, he does appear to be sincerely remorseful and having insight into his actions and its consequences. A stabilizing factor in his life is the unwavering support of his grandmother. Unless Mr. Ninow adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, as well as psychological and psychiatric treatment, he is considered at risk to re-offend. My Lord, do you want me to read the recommendations as well? Okay, so the recommendations is that he requires drug rehabilitation treatment. He should see a psychiatrist for management of his psychiatric medication. He should also see a clinical psychologist for individual psychotherapy, as well as attend any group therapy or any programs that can aid in his psychological treatment.
Thank you. My Lord, if I could then request that the CV be marked Exhibit H and the report Exhibit I. Oh, well, but we're not supposed to use I or J.
No, madam.
CV would be H and the report Exhibit J. Then just wants to clarify, antisocial personality disorder, in layman's terms, what would that be called?
So it also is referred to as psychopathy. So it is somebody who, like I said, on the one hand, has constant conflict with the law because they break rules, they have no respect for any laws, so they're often in conflict with the law. They also don't have any respect for others' rights, so they will violate other people's rights. And what makes them able to do that recurringly is the fact that they don't have any empathy with their victim.
In short, a psychopath.
Yes.
But that is not in it.
No.
Thank you, Lord. I've got no further questions for this witness.
Thank you, madam. Madam, your report stems back from the accused's childhood, correct?
Correct, my lord.
You have highlighted the trauma that he suffered as a child, and as a result of that, then you also indicated in the report what might be the effect as he grows up. Is that correct?
Correct, my lord.
Ma'am, you said at the age of, he started staying with his grandmother at the age of 8 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And by that time, he was already sexually abused. He has already witnessed abuse.
That's correct.
And he was not yet on drugs and alcohol. Is that correct?
That's correct, my lord.
Now, he referred to his mother as his idol and a pillar of support. Grandmother is. At that age, do you agree with me that 8 years is still a tender age? And if given a support, love, and taken care of, were there any chances that he would, if he would turn out to be a different person to what he is today?
Just rephrase the question, please.
Look, he was abused.
Yes.
Then from the age of 4 up until, say, before 8 years old.
Before he lived with his grandmother, that's
Yes,
correct.
before he lived with his grandmother. And the grandmother took him in, gave him love and support, and was always willing even to take him for rehabilitation to rehabilitation centers.
Correct.
Now, if he did not engage in drugs and alcohol, is it possible that he would have turned a different person as he is today?
I believe so, my lord.
And the trauma or the effect of abuse, trauma, and all the that he has suffered as a child will always show different to different people. Is that correct?
That's correct, my lord.
So a different person, say a child who has been abused, exposed to sexually abused and witness abuse, two different children, when they grow up, they may tend to be different people.
That's correct, my
Others
lord.
may be aggressive and others not.
That's correct.
Ma'am, this I'm saying because there were manner in which the accused testified and verbalized before this court that the grandmother was very supportive and was always the pillar of his strength. What do you think went wrong with him to turn up to be what he is today?
I think the influence of his mother was not good, because when he started visiting her is reportedly when he started using drugs. So although the grandmother did everything in her power to give him a stable childhood, when her daughter asked her, "Can Mr. Ninow please come and stay with me for the weekend?" she allowed it.
Now, the fact that the accused was afforded opportunities, in his own evidence, he said 5 times he went for treatment centers. Now, if he was willing to turn a different person, would that not have helped you?
My lord, it would. What he said to me was that he went to these rehabilitation centers because, the first psychiatrist referred him there in her referral letter, and he did it to please his grandmother. As he stated this morning, he was for a long time in denial about his drug addiction. So what he's saying now is that he wasn't always as motivated when he was doing those programs.
And is he verbalizing to be motivated at the moment?
That's correct, my lord.
Could it be because he knows that in this case he's facing a possible life imprisonment?
My lord, I wouldn't know what his reasons would be.
But could that be possible? Look,
Sorry?
Is there a possibility?
It is a possibility.
thank you. The reason why I'm asking this question is because you said people or pedophiles, not that, okay, you said pedophiles sometimes have a character to be able to be manipulated.
My lord, I said the antisocial personality disorder has that character trait of being manipulative.
Antisocial. And a person who is manipulative can never be always truthful. Is that correct? Because if you manipulate, you need to get a situation favorable to yourself.
That's correct.
So will you agree with me that such kind of a person may not always be truthful?
That's correct, my lord. But like I said, I don't think he has that characteristic. So I don't think that antisocial personality disorder is a risk factor in this case.
Ma'am, for you, you have assessed the accused and you have drafted up this report. How many times have you visited the accused in prison to see him?
3 times, my lord.
And for how long?
I can go to the beginning of my report, page 3, 1.4. Clinical interviews with the accused on, and then I give the date. So the first was 1 hour and 30 minutes. The second time I interviewed him was 2 hours and 30 minutes, and the third time was 2 hours.
So basically it was plus or minus 6 hours.
That's correct.
And you were able to extract information from his childhood up until now and be able to make those diagnoses that you have made.
That's correct, my lord.
In 6 hours.
Not just because there 1.4 says sources used for the compilation of the report. So I used the information that I got from him, as well as the information I got from his grandmother and his ex-fiancée. I spent at least 2.5 hours with the ex-fiancée, at least 3 hours with the grandmother face to face. And of course all the documentation, the case docket, the affidavit from his custody matter, is where I got also a lot of information. The psychiatric report from Westkoppies, the healing wings, I received records from, I received a copy of even his prescription for the medication from his psychiatrist. So there were multiple sources. Sorry, my lord, can you? Not printed, but I know I was sent the verdict, your verdict that you delivered. So the judgment, yeah. So from the, I know the facts of the matter. My Mr. Alberts, who instructed me, informed me.
And ma'am, you mentioned also that just a moment, madam. Now, you mentioned that the accused seems to display behavior of difficulties in terms of anger, outbursts, and occasional impulsive behavior.
Correct, my lord.
So this impulsive behavior, if you say occasional, it means it's controllable.
It means occasional, that it happens at times, and at other times he's not that impulsive.
And you further mentioned that the use of a drug has sexual stimulant that could cause a person to be sexually aroused.
That's what the literature says, my lord. The academic literature.
And you mentioned that a person who is in use of such a drug, when sexually aroused, may sometimes want to have or to relieve themselves who would want to relieve themselves to an adult. If an adult is not available, then they may tend to a child as a surrogate, correct?
That's correct, my lord.
Now, there's evidence before this court that Mr. Ninow made utterances of willing or wishing to have sexual intercourse with a certain adult woman. And the fact that that woman was not available for him. In your opinion, is it possible that he had to relieve himself, opted to make this child, the victim in the case, as a sacrifice, a surrogate for the sexual?
That is possible, my lord.
And the evidence says that is what points to the fact that that is what he did.
That's possible, my lord.
Let me get that enough possible.
So I'm just saying that obviously in his mind, in that moment, I don't know exactly what he was thinking, but it's very possible that he was sexually aroused and there wasn't an adult there, so he turned to a child. I'm saying it's very possible.
You said you don't know the effect of this.
No,
This incident inside the toilet of the rescue, where there were adults and young people.
I'm aware of that, my lord.
So where does the answer change?
So I'm saying that it is very possible that that this explanation, that we can indeed apply it to what happened in this matter. So I'm saying that he was sexually aroused and there wasn't an adult available, so he turned to a child and raped the child.
But there were adult people around.
Yeah, my lord, I can't say why exactly in that moment he decided to do that.
And also, you say, in the dynamics of sexual behavior of, say, a pedophile or a person that is in use of drugs, they may shift, the aggression may start, they may be self-infliction, they may be a danger to themselves, inflicting self-injuries to themselves, and it might progress to inflict injuries to others.
That's correct, my lord.
Now, ma'am, in this instance, there is evidence before this court that even when the accused was sexually aroused after he has used drugs, he would not force himself to his own fiancée. So now, in this instance, on the day in question, how do you make of that situation when now he was aroused and he prayed for the child and followed him into the bathroom?
The same answers I've just given, that I think that he was sexually aroused. There wasn't a male person available, so he then decided to turn to a child.
And ma'am, the evidence before this court shows that he did not act impulsively. He actually planned. And do you agree with me that the fact that he made utterances to want to have sexual intercourse with a woman and then the child was turned to be a surrogate, that is what he planned to have had sexual intercourse with the child?
That is the fact that the court found, that he planned it.
And you do agree with the facts and coupled with your investigation, is that correct?
When I spoke to Mr. Ninow, he maintains his version of the story, but I am working with what the court found, which is that it was planned.
You see, ma'am, when you were called to compile the report, It was specifically a pre-sentence report. What did you understand by that?
I would like to refer to the, let me just get the page number. Page 2, introduction. Purpose of report. So I say there that Mr. Alberts asked me to do a pre-sentencing report. I then say Mr. Ninow was found guilty of rape of a minor, possession of drugs, and defeating the ends of justice. Purpose of report, I quote from a guide to sentencing in South Africa. The main purpose of a pre-sentence report is to assist the presiding officer in gaining a better understanding of the offender and the reasons for his crime, be better informed about the character in the broadest sense of the word, and the possible future of the offender. This is one of the triad of factors the court has to consider in sentencing. This triad is one of the general principles of sentencing and consists of three basic elements, namely the crime, the criminal, and the interest of society. And then a quote again from the sentencing book that says, assistance by experts in the field of human behavior can therefore be of much assistance in determining the effect this factor should have on the eventual sentence.
I do understand that. That is a quotation of a book that you write. My question is, in your own words, what was the purpose of this report?
My Lord, the purpose of the report was to give a detailed history of the accused and also to help the court to maybe understand factors that possibly influenced his behavior when he committed the crime, and then also looking at the future of the offender and what risk he poses currently.
It is not the people of the pre-sentence report to assist the court in coming to an appropriate.
My Lord, I can't hear,
It
sorry.
is not the purpose of the pre-sentence report to assist the court to come to an appropriate sentence.
Yes, but only with this one element of the triad, namely the criminal. The court has to take into consideration the interest of society and various other things. So it's not my role to propose a specific sentence. I am here to give the court insight into the history and the behavior and the possible future of the criminal, which the court can then use to do a sentence.
Now, offense, or how he committed the offense?
Yes, so the factors that I describe under point 3, point 3 and point 4. I would like to just read from our report on page 15. That would be the summary or conclusion of those two parts of the report. These factors, namely parenting factors, I mentioned them earlier, but I can mention them again.
You say page 15?
15, right at the bottom, 4.1.8. So these factors, namely parenting factors, his own sexual abuse history, and being intoxicated with alcohol and drugs at the time of committing the offense, cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors. So I'm not saying that he committed this crime because he was intoxicated or because he was abused as a child. I'm just saying it's factors in his life that might have played a role in understanding his behavior. So I go on to say, but based on the above academic literature, could potentially have played a role in his behavior, and it could be risk factors for the future.
Now, you mentioned that you correctly say that these factors, they are not cause, or they are not the direct causal factors to the offense.
That's correct, my lord.
Now, the accused in his own testimony, he mentioned that he does not care anymore. Nothing matters anymore. He's full of anger. And as you agreed earlier on, that the degree of infliction of injury may always increase from oneself to another. Taking into consideration that he was also taken for rehabilitation to rehabilitation centers 5 times. And at one instance, he was expelled before, at 10 months, he was expelled because he continued to use the drugs.
That's correct, my lord.
All those factors taken together, wouldn't you say the accused is a danger to the community?
I'd like to refer to my summary on page 27. In fact, page 28.
Page 28.
9.9.
Yes.
Unless Mr. Ninow adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, as well as psychological and psychiatric treatment, he's considered at risk to reoffend.
And the fact that he was at the rehabilitation center 5 times already, and at one stage he was expelled. And at all times he was using drugs, and in his own evidence today here, he said he's still using drugs in prison.
That's correct, my lord.
Do you agree that he is a danger to the community?
I believe he's a danger if he does not adhere to his psychiatric treatment and drug rehabilitation. I think once those factors are managed, the risk would become lower.
But will they be manageable if the offender, in the form of the accused, is unwilling to cooperate or to accept that he's got a problem? And
so if he's still denying that he has a problem and doesn't want to accept treatment,
or the persistent use of drugs?
yeah, so if he is not willing to undergo treatment, then it wouldn't be possible to rehabilitate him. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Look, he's been to a rehabilitation center 5 times already, and he has seen different kind of professionals
Yes.
who can try and assist him.
Yeah.
And always, even in the rehabilitation centers, he would continue to take drugs.
Yes.
Would that not make him a risk to the community?
I believe that if he does not adhere to the treatment for
Then
his...
he has already.
Yeah, so if we look at...
taken,
Yeah.
and he did not adhere to the processes. Will you still say he is safe to be out there in the community, or
I don't think it's my place to make that decision.
But you are an expert. I can't say it's not your place. You're an expert. Why are you You're not here to assist.
So I think that he is at a higher risk to reoffend if he continues his drug use and he doesn't adhere to psychiatric medication. If those factors are under control, I think he is a lower risk for society to reoffend, to sexually reoffend.
Ma'am, you say it is not in your place to say whether he is a risk to the community. Is it in your place to say he may not re-offend or he may not reuse the drugs if given a chance? Taking into consideration the chances that he was afforded going to the rehabilitation centers.
So we've got the history that he has relapsed every time, and that's why I've indicated it as a risk factor, treatment adherence. Going forward, and as I said earlier, we can only go on what the accused tell us, and he told me that all the previous times he wasn't really motivated. He says he's motivated now. Whether he's going to adhere to treatment, we don't know. We have the history of him completing programs, though. He hasn't dropped out, but he has relapsed every time. So in terms of the history, I mean, I think, in general, drug addiction is a lifelong thing that is difficult to be rehabilitated from. But that's going to depend on himself.
Ma'am, even after he has verbalized that he intends to change, he is in prison. Today, he mentioned that he has taken drugs in prison, right in prison, more than 2 years.
Told me as well.
Would you say he's a person who's maybe who can possibly rehabilitate?
I think it's
Despite him verbalizing that he is ready to change, yet he takes drugs still.
I think it is possible for him to rehabilitate, but I agree with you, those factors is negative factors. The fact that he still breaks rules.
Factors, if I may put it, do I understand you correctly that those factors makes him a risk to the community?
There is the possibility that he will reoffend, yes.
And that will make him a risk to the community.
That's correct, my lord.
Ma'am, you are in a private practice, correct?
Correct?
And you came at a fee. At a fee.
Look, I don't know.
As I will withdraw that.
I'm saying to the higher court,
As the court pleases, madam.
we are no longer an expert. We have to be neutral. I think that's what I'm trying to say to you.
Yeah.
You understand?
I know, yeah.
As the court pleases. And ma'am, the evidence before this court clearly indicated that the accused planned on that day, he preyed on the child, attacked her, and raped her.
Correct, my lord?
And I further put it to you, finally, that there is no way that the accused can rehabilitate, taking into consideration that he's been given a chance, he's been to rehabilitation centers before, and he did not consider telling a new leaf.
My lord, I can't agree with the words, there's no way, because we can't say that. There is a possibility that he will be rehabilitated.
Yeah,
But
based on the fact that he has been to the rehabilitation
Yes.
center in the past, and then they didn't work.
yes, and as
What
I
are the chances now?
yeah, so I suppose the chances, it'll be hard to put a percentage to that, because what is also saying
But
to
you
us,
have to summarize. What can you say?
what is also saying to us is that previously he wasn't motivated, now he is motivated. So there is a chance that he will adhere to his treatment, but we've seen a history of non-adherence. So
But he's going to kill himself if he gets life sentence.
sorry, the question is?
He says he's going to kill
Yes.
himself if he gets. What is the motivation?
He said that the motivation is just self-hate and for having committed this offense.
And ma'am, could it be possible that the accused, knowing that you are preparing a report for pre-sentence, he could have manipulated your processes to give an outcome that, in your opinion, will make you believe that he still can change given a chance.
My Lord, I'm not here for the accused. I'm not here for any party. I think I've done enough of these kinds of assessments, worked with enough offenders to not be manipulated, and therefore I based my opinion on my interaction with him, but as well as other multiple sources, interviews, documentation, etc. So I believe my opinion is neutral.
Ma'am, maybe you did not understand my question correctly. I'm saying, given the fact that you have mentioned that people who are on drugs, they have a character that they are able to manipulate situations to get them favorable on their side. Then the question is it possible or is it not possible that, knowing that this is a pre-sentence report, he could have manipulated your processes in order for you at the end to make an opinion, formulated an opinion that he is.
My Lord, I said that being manipulative is a character trait of antisocial personality disorder. And I don't think that risk is not indicated in this matter. So, and I refer to my previous answer in terms of, I think that I, compiled the report from multiple resources, and I have experience in doing so. So I believe that my report is neutral, objective, and I hope it will assist the court.
I'm with you on that. But now, the accused mentioned that at some stage he requested his grandma to book him off so that he may be away from people. How would you classify that character?
I think that is part of his depressive symptoms of hating himself and the rest of the world, and not wanting, because he's, like I said, his main coping mechanism is the use of drugs when in stressful situations. So he's learned that as a child to always turn to drugs, which is also a way of escaping. So I would say that saying that he wanted to go away would be avoiding his own problems by going to the psychiatric, just as he avoids his problems by drug use.
Antisocial disorder would it not fit in that kind of?
No, my Lord.
That will be all right.
Thank you, my Lord. I think a few aspects. You were asked about the fact that the accused from the age of 8 years old was living as surroundings with his grandmother.
That's good.
Would everything else, would that mean that everything else that happened before with him would just be disregarded and erased?
I think that if his grandmother wasn't there to take care of him and he didn't have that stable relationship, that he probably wouldn't have completed school, did well at school, etc. She's like a protecting, stabilizing factor in his life. So, am I answering your question? So,
would that mean that everything that happens before that doesn't?
No, of course not. The first 7 years of your life is quite important in terms of growth and development as a child.
Understand it correctly, the mother, although the grandmother was now in control, the mother kept on having some interaction with him.
That's correct, my lord.
So I'm involved in this.
Yes.
I just want to make, you could paragraph of page 18 of your report, the gynecosexual behaviors. I didn't just, there were questions regarding the possibility of you being played, put it that way. Could you just explain to us what the scale is and whether they are in for the test? My lord, that is
We haven't.
my lord, that aspect was specific. Maybe I should ask this because this is something that was not mentioned. My lord, the question in cross-examination was whether the accused could manipulate. And I just want to highlight something in the report that wasn't specifically mentioned, and that is as far as the validity scale of that gynecosexual behavior arrangement.
Go to the relevant part.
5.2.2. 2.2. So the response validity pertain to instances where the examinee's responses is not necessarily correct, and that could be just because their focus was elsewhere and they didn't, or he may have been trying to project a false image to the examiner. For this reason, the test contains validity scale, namely the inconsistent responding index. There are 16 pairs of items that are usually given similar ratings, and when 8 or more of these pairs are inconsistent, then you cannot interpret the score of the test. You cannot assume that the protocol is valid. Mr. Ninow's score on that scale was 5, and his test protocol can thus be considered valid.
Is it possible for you to say whether he's going to rehabilitate the offender? Is it possible for you to say?
He may reoffend, especially if he doesn't adhere to drug rehabilitation and psychiatric treatment. Then he's at a higher risk.
Maybe I should ask the question this way. What can you do in helping the court to decide whether there is a risk of reoffending? What have you done in this report?
So there is the chance that the offender will reoffend.
Your expertise, if I can put it that way, employed in compiling the report. What can you do to guess whether he could reoffend or not?
My lord, I refer to page 28 of my report, where I mentioned that I've looked at all these different risk factors, and that literature tells us that, I'm just going to read, multiple reviews of decades of sex offender recidivism research has shown 2 major risk factors related to sexual offences, which are, the one is deviant sexual interest, and the other one is antisocial personality disorder. Mr. Ninow doesn't have either of these risk factors. So the chance of him, I mean, I've worked with people who they deny what they've done, they still rationalize that it wasn't that bad, etc. So from a point of view that he doesn't have a sexual interest in children, not at this stage, I can't find evidence of it, and the fact that he is not an antisocial person, therefore would increase the possibility that he will be rehabilitated and that he wouldn't reoffend.
Thank you, Lord Dr. for the questions. file a report, very sensitive report for the accused in this matter. That's it. Would you mind taking us through the report? It's not necessary to read the item, but just take us through the report.
Okay, I will start with the background of the accused. I started with the accused version of the offense. He stated that he was on a 3-day binge drug use, and as he was continuing with his drug use, he became increasingly deliberate and willful. Also, because of the time when he went to operate his client, he met without paying. And on the day of the incident, he wanted to go to work. He was absolutely at risk for 2 days, but he decided to report the manager, and when he was 60 days, he returned to the cat. On his way home, the accused got a street at the house of his wife, because he had to think of what to say to his wife.
Can I just ask you about that? What you have been trials of?
Then when he got to the restaurant, he had no plan, he says. He only sat down and had some alcohol. And then he says the place was full of black people, so when he noticed the white person, he approached him thinking he knew him. But then he realized he does not know him, but he continued to approach him and he engaged in conversation with him. Then they shared some drinks and he talked, and he states that he could have made inappropriate comments, but he cannot recall what they were. And then he says he constantly reached the bathroom to use drugs. And then later the manager joined in the conversation. But then the accused went again to the toilets, but this time the female bathroom. And he entered the first cubicle, the door did not lock, and then the girl came in, saying she wanted to leave, and he pulled her inside. And then I quote, he said, my mind was very evil. He was in another state of mind, and it was never my intention to hurt her. And then the accused say, I must have lifted her up on the toilet and pulled her down her tights, and then I had messed up fools. And then the accused put his fingers in the vagina and realized it was wrong. And then I tried to put my fingers in the mouth, and I was busy trying to eat it. Then he started pushing on the door, and I pushed back, and the door opened, and the accused ran off and ran pants. And then he states that he cannot recall exact details of the incident. He has fragmented memories and only remembers sensitive parts. And then previous convictions, he has no previous convictions. He has a gentleman with family background. Family background I obtained from the accused and also from his grandmother. The accused is 21 years old and the only child of his parents. His mother was 15 years when she gave birth to him. The enemy is the brother of the father. The accused mother was also drugs. After birth, the accused and his mother stayed with his maternal grandparents. Then the mother of the accused began a relationship with a man, and they worked together, and the accused was approximately 18 months old. Further maternal grandmother, the accused, the relationship between his mother and his boyfriend was physically abusive, and the relationship ended, and then the relations with his grandparents. And then later the mother entered into another relationship. A man described as without maternal parents by the grandmother. The accused and his mother moved out of his grandparents' house in Korea to the house with another boyfriend.
early attachment experience of insecure persons are characterized by rejecting or inconsistent parenting, which may hamper the development of inner resources necessary for successful coping with life stresses. Insecure attachment has been found to be associated with depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and substance abuse, as well as behavioral problems, including aggression, antisocial behavior, and conduct disorder. Insecure attachment is associated with dysfunctional attitudes, which predict lower self-esteem and higher depressive symptoms. Various literature shows key variable identified in the development of individual characteristics of any criminal propensity is the role played by parents in terms of factors such as attachment, child rearing practices, neglect, abuse, supervision, and parents' own criminal behavior. Regarding polyvictimization is defined as an experience of multiple forms of trauma. Children can be exposed to various adversities, including property victimization, assault and bullying, sexual victimization, witnessing and exposure to violence, and maltreatment. The accused was exposed to property victimization when his childhood home was raided for debt owed to drug dealers. The accused was a victim of physical and sexual abuse. He witnessed violence and aggression towards his mother and suffered maltreatment in terms of psychological abuse and bullying. Polyvictimized children are at risk of several difficulties during childhood years, with a wide array of even internalizing and externalizing behavior. They show an increased risk of substance abuse, mental health difficulties, and social struggles. The accused shows various internalizing behavior with known depressions and feelings of not being good enough, being a disappointment, and full of shame. And using drugs help avoid these feelings and gives him confidence in himself. And he has also a lot of externalizing behavior in terms of aggression, impulsivity, and defiance. And the accused admits that drug use only enhanced this behavior. And then the accused's lack of secure attachment together with polyvictimization exacerbate these feelings of depression, inadequacy, disappointment, and guilt. The accused's drug use was a way of avoiding these feelings.